You know that feeling, right? A force inside you that's so strong, so intense, it feels like it could just burn right through your skin. Well, today, we're diving into a story about that exact hidden power, this ancient fire that we all carry inside of us, and the choice we face. Do we become its master, or do we become its victim? So let's set the scene. Imagine a man just struggling through his day. The pressure's building up, and finally, he stumbles. And in that one moment of raw frustration, he just lets it out. He screams at the heavens. And of course, the people in the village, they're watching from a distance. And all they see is chaos, a disturbance.
To them, it's really simple. The guy's outburst is just a failure of character. It shatters their calm, predictable world, and so they slap a label on him. He's wicked, impulsive, a failure. He's an enemy of the peace, just someone who doesn't have the decency to suffer in silence.
But what if that snap judgment, what if that easy label misses the entire point? What if what they're seeing as some kind of moral failing is actually something else entirely? Something more like a force of nature that has absolutely nothing to do with wickedness at all. Okay, so let's explore this inner energy from a totally different angle. To do that, we're going to look through the eyes of a wise observer, from our source material, a figure known only as the Wandering Spirit.
See, the spirit doesn't look at that man and see a failure. It sees something it calls the internal flame. And this isn't just an emotion like anger or sadness. No, it's described as this primal, pressurized force. Think of it like magma deep inside a volcano. It just builds and builds and builds until it absolutely has to find a way out.
And that right there is the key. That's the huge shift in perspective. From the spirit's point of view, releasing this pressure isn't a choice or a lapse in judgment. It is a biological necessity. It's like breathing. Suppressing it isn't a sign of strength. It's actually a guaranteed path to self-destruction.
And this really illustrates the true danger here. The alternative to that outburst isn't some peaceful, quiet life. No, it's a kind of spiritual death. It's a total collapse from within, where your soul just becomes trapped, silent, and completely stagnant.
So what we have are two completely different ways of looking at the exact same event. You've got society's judgment on one side and the spirit's deep understanding on the other. Let's put them side by side and see just how different they really are.
I mean, just look at how stark this contrast is. It's incredible. Where the village folks see wickedness, the spirit just sees a force of nature. What they call a curse, the spirit calls a biological necessity. And the big one, what society condemns as a disturber of the peace, is, from the spirit's perspective, a courageous refusal of stagnation. It's not a crime. It's an act of survival. Let's look at a story from our source to really see this in action. In a city where everyone had traded their voices for a hollow, dead silence, there was this girl whose chest literally vibrated like a coming storm. The elders, terrified of this raw energy, they branded her a disturber of the peace.
But the wandering spirit saw the truth. Her tremors weren't a sin. They weren't a curse. They were the physical proof, the sound of a life force pushing back against that crushing silence. It was her spirit fighting to stay alive.
But it's not just society that gets this wrong. Let's be honest, we often lie to ourselves about our own internal fire. We dress it up in these noble costumes to make it feel a little more acceptable.
And the parable of the night is just a perfect example of this. He's standing there, over all this destruction he's caused, and he's telling himself and anyone who will listen that he did it for some divine holy cause. It's this grand story he spends to try and soothe his own trembling hands. The spirit has a name for this: vanity. It's the act of crafting these elaborate, noble-sounding stories to justify our outbursts. We do it to hide the real truth, even from ourselves, the truth that we were driven by something much more raw, much more primal, an unscripted animal force we're too afraid to even name. But the wandering spirit just cuts right through that self-deception. It looks at the night and says, "There was no holy light here. There was no noble cause. There was only the raw fire of a man who didn't know how to carry his own internal heat, and so he just let it spill out and burn everything around him." So, this brings us to the ultimate choice. Once we finally acknowledge that this fire exists, that it's real and it's inevitable, what do we do with it? Are we just doomed to be destructive, or is there another way? The parable of the two forges lays this out so perfectly. You've got two brothers, and they're each given a burning piece of the sun. The first brother is terrified of it. He clenches his fist, tries to suppress it, to hide the heat, and of course, the pressure just builds and builds until he erupts, becoming a wrecking ball. But the second brother, he accepts the heat, and instead of fighting it, he builds a forge and uses that fire to create.
The outcome couldn't be clearer. One brother becomes a slave to the pressure, a wrecking ball. The other becomes an architect. And what's so fascinating is how this ancient wisdom perfectly mirrors modern psychological concepts. Becoming an architect is what psychologists today call self-regulation. It's using techniques like sublimation, channeling that raw, intense energy, not into destruction, but into art, or work, or innovation. It's cognitive reframing, learning to see that heat not as a threat, but as fuel. The Wandering Spirit's forge is really just a timeless metaphor for the very real tools we have to master our inner worlds.
Okay, so the final lesson from the Wandering Spirit is about accepting the inevitable. It's about really understanding that this fire isn't something you can just negotiate with or extinguish.
So, imagine a king who spends his entire life building these massive iron dams around a volcano that's simmering right under his throne. He's convinced that with enough laws, enough control, enough forced silence, he can put that fire out for good.
The Wandering Spirit just sits on top of one of those dams and laughs, and then it delivers the final unchangeable truth. You cannot stop the volcano. The pressure will build, the fire is coming, whether you like it or not.
And here it is, the Spirit's most profound advice to the king and to all of us. Stop treating this energy like an enemy you have to contain. It's not your foe, it is your greatest resource. It is the very heat required for transformation. It's the only thing that can turn the raw, worthless sand of your potential into something brilliant.
So in the end, the question isn't if your internal flame will rise, but what you will do when it does. Because the pressure is always building, the fire is coming. Are you going to build a dam that's destined to break? Or are you going to build a forge